Okay, so a recent Citrix survey, I think, revealed that 50% plus of IT leaders in the UK have either taken out or are thinking of removing workloads out from the cloud. So I guess it would be good to understand sort of if that is surprising, or I suppose what was the survey designed? Was it designed to find this out, or how did you come across this finding, I suppose, if we can put it like that?
Yeah, I guess I'll go back to sort of our customer conversations that have been happening, and that was really the impetus for creating the survey in the first place. So what I was noticing happening amongst the Citrix customer base, was a few years ago, huge push towards cloud. Pandemic only accelerated that as people were running out of rooms in their data centers and they needed to support workers from everywhere and so on. And then as we kind of went through and we're going on future roadmaps and plans, I just noticed that there was sort of a staunch group of people that were like, nope, can't move to the cloud. It's not going to happen. A majority of them that had moved to the cloud, but were saying, well, we're not so sure, or some of their migration plans had started to slow down. And then still a bunch that are, we're cloud first, we're moving things forward into cloud and finding new workloads there. And so as we were, quite frankly, internally trying to come up with our own strategy and thinking about not only where do we build our solutions, do we do it all in the cloud, or do we have some on, for the on-prem customers, and what kind of offerings do we create? Just couldn't help but note that there was still a lot of this decision making and almost to the point of confusion, if you will, on like where workloads should reside and whether things were working out for them. So then we launched a survey to try and get a broader understanding across industries and across geographies of what was really happening, what were the concerns, and if we were seeing signs of people pulling things back from the cloud, was that a more concerning trend, saying that that it's not still moving in a cloud direction. And so I think the survey results were very enlightening in that perspective of really just saying all options are possible for customers at this point in time. And that I think what's happening is that there's a realization that cloud is a type of use case. It's a workload use case. There are things that are absolutely better done in cloud, and then there are other things that are necessary for whatever reason to do on-prem. I would say the general trend is still towards cloud, but very rarely now are we seeing people that are 100% cloud for everything. And that kind of said to us anyway that hybrid or hybrid multi-cloud needed to be the strategy for our own solutions and for a lot of our customers' environments.
Okay, and in terms of that sort of, I don't know, we call it pushback against cloud slide or whatever. I think you uncovered that a lot of people potentially have security concerns when it comes to the cloud. And is that because nobody quite understands who's responsible for security when you put your application in the cloud, or what's going on there, if you can explain?
Yeah, so I'll be careful to say that I don't think it's necessarily that they encountered security issues per se, right? And in many cases, certainly for I'd say smaller, mid-sized enterprises that can't invest in large security teams, having the expertise of a cloud provider is helpful in actually driving security. So that there's actually many cases for that. What I've sort of qualitatively figured out from that data is that it's not so much security per se, but it's really the concern about compliance. So as you say, where is the line drawn between my responsibility, as the customer, and the cloud vendor's responsibility in terms of security, and how am I going to answer a regulator when they want me to define my end-to-end process for how I'm complying with whatever either internal or external requirement that they've got. So I think that's really largely what it is. It's a concern of how we got this workload up there, and now we're going through a compliance process, and we realize there's either gaps or we're not entirely clear on who's got ownership over which piece of it, and so from an operational standpoint, that seems to be the trend on why, if they responded, that a security concern was involved, why that's happening.
And is it also potentially, because I know there's sort of data sovereignty issues, which are, I guess, very closely linked to compliance. So is it also the fact that they potentially just don't know where their data is residing in the cloud? Is that give them cause for concern as well?
Yeah, that's also a great point. And particularly, we've seen this across the European continent, where there are so many countries with sovereign clouds and sovereign requirements. Um, and I think and the regulations, by the way, are also relatively new. So some of them are still testing the boundaries of what those regulations mean. And for example, what we've seen is, hey, if there's sort of general customer account data, like the billing and and their overall entitlement and their usage of a cloud, that sort of thing. If that's the only thing that's kind of stored outside of the cloud, that might be okay. But any of their actual intellectual property, their data, their workloads, their own customer transactions, or any of their user personal identifiable information, that needs to stay in country. That seems to be the trend, but still, I think there's some nervousness about whether they will run afoul of some kind of regulation, and saying, well, let's just put it all in country somehow.
And one of the other potential reasons as to people slightly sort of reevaluating, I guess, their cloud versus on-prem strategy. I think that the report details the fact that the cloud simply failed to meet, it was sort of hyped up as this sort of marvelous place where everything was sort of, it was a nirvana for companies, and perhaps that hype didn't, the reality didn't quite live up. So people were basically disappointed with the cloud. Is that fair to say?
I'd say there are some areas where they ran into tooling for applications that was more challenging than they realized, or in particular, my company's focus is more on the larger enterprise. In the large enterprise, we always like to say it's kind of like an archaeological dig of software in there, right? So there are things that were designed many generations before cloud ever existed, and so that migration process or the modernization process is, maybe taking them a little longer than they thought. Um, so I think that is in some of those cases where certain applications have to be pulled back and some of the workloads have to be pulled back because they're not able to make them function, or they realize here's another very common one is they've got two applications that are intertwined with each other, and they didn't realize that when they moved one, the fewer milliseconds more of latency that they experience between applications, they weren't designed to handle that, and so they start throwing errors at each other, right? So lots of like architectural things like that. I think also when it's kind of intermingled with the cost model as well. So until you start running those workloads on the cloud instances and seeing the interdependencies between the databases and the ingress and egress of data as it goes out of there, it's harder to understand until you've gone through that, what the cost model looks like, and and the way a lot of the enterprise agreements are designed. It is, you sort of commit for 3 years for a certain amount of money, and then you kind of drain that down, right? And so watching the drain happen and kind of getting an understanding of that cost, I think, is influencing some of the decision to both move things to cloud as well as move things back from cloud.
Okay, so yeah, you sort of touched on cost, performance things. Was downtime potentially also an issue with the service of the cloud compared to what they might have been expecting on-prem? Or again, I suspect, as you say, if it's smaller companies that don't have internal IT resources, they may well find the cloud's actually better for them. But yeah, just you can perhaps unpick the downtime situation.
Yeah, well, exactly that. I think so. Sort of depending on where you're coming from, the downtime might be much less. But what I also see, and this will go back to sort of the hybrid stance, is a lot of enterprises looking at cloud as their DR scenario, not necessarily their production scenario, right? Or that's sort of a first gateway use case for a lot of the organizations. So they want this ability to be able to say, okay, I'm comfortable with how it is on-prem, but I know I'm subject to downtime and I've got maintenance issues and whatnot, and there could be climate change events or what have you. And cloud is particularly well suited for that quick burst, for that, sort of as long as I can stage it and I know that I can replicate, at least to get to a functional state in the event of a disaster. So they look at least the customers I've talked to, they look at sort of the ultimate scenario of being one of combining stuff that's under my control in my data center with cloud as an additional resource and bursting capacity. And then I think the more mature customers or ones that are further down this journey have been looking more recently also at multi-cloud failover, right? So I don't want all my eggs in one basket. So I want some collection of stuff here, but another option in case there's a catastrophic failure somewhere in the backplane.
Okay, and what you sort of mentioned at various stages, the fact that people aren't sort of rejecting the cloud totally or rejecting on-prem totally, so we're in the middle. But I think the report says that despite issues with the cloud, if we call them that, I think 2/3 of the people, the IT leaders you talk to, are still happy to, even if projects have kind of failed, they're still pretty much comfortable with at least considering the cloud for, as part of their IT strategy. Is that right?
Yeah, exactly. I think it's very rare that I see that that the entire cloud project has failed. It's usually, hey, this portion of it didn't work, or this set of applications, or this business unit is not appropriate for what we're doing in cloud, and others are, right? So I think the mantra a few years ago used to be we're cloud first, we're cloud only, and now what I hear over and over again is we want to be cloud smart. So the use case has to match the capabilities of the cloud, and the workload and the cost structure of cloud has to match as well. But there's still a lot of great reasons why people want to leverage the cloud. They've just got to figure out what those use cases are. So even when we look at those percentages and we say, oh, people are moving away to the cloud or people are moving towards cloud. I think like all things in life, it's rarely that any one customer is 100% one way or the other. Those are kind of on the outliers of the extremes. The vast majority of them are, somewhere in that 60-40 range, 80-20 range. There's some percentage of things that are on-prem, some things that are in cloud, and that just really changes, I think, the IT vendor and service provider landscape, and saying that, hey, no, you can't put everything or make your only available solution or your best solution as a cloud only service, because you've got this need to enable the customer to be hybrid. And if that's going to be a permanent state, that kind of changes the way you look at your roadmap.
Yeah, that's an interesting point, as you say, because I mean, all the vendors, along with, I guess, their customers were rushing to the cloud, and so the vendors were, software as a service, all the cloud offerings, etc. But you're saying now that even if they were thinking to kind of phase out physical, offerings, they're now understanding that they have to keep those because they can't afford to just assume everyone's going to pile into the cloud. So with that hybrid model, is, as you outlined earlier, is security or the compliance bit, is that the number one sort of consideration as to where workloads are, or are there other things like performance and stuff, or is compliance the big driver as to what goes where?
Compliance is a huge one. Yeah, you're absolutely right on that one. I'd say the other one is sort of related to compliance, but maybe more business oriented. Might be something, I'll say, like operational control. So my favorite example of this will be, say, the insurance agencies, for example, or retail, right? Any sort of industry where you have a self-mandated blackout period. Do not touch these systems because it's open enrollment season, or it is Christmas, and we get it to a known working state, and it's a complete moratorium on making any IT changes except for security patches or something like that, right? So that happens very regularly in a lot of instances, and I think what some of those customers have found is that that's just not the way a cloud is set up, right? You inherently give up some of that operational control over the servers, over hardware refreshes, over OS refreshes, and things like that, because that is part of the service that the cloud provider offers you. And meanwhile, in the background, their tooling and their APIs will continue to update because that's how cloud is built. It's built to be continuous improvement, continuous development. And so for customers that need that sort of operational control and need to be able to say, hey, we're not touching anything, or I need to know where the on-off switch is for a particular server so I can reboot it for a particular application or a use case. That's the other area where people really feel like the need to keep some of that stuff within arm's reach, if you will.
And maybe just in sort of summarizing or finishing, in terms of this hybrid model, is it obvious to users what should belong where, or is it quite nuanced? Is it even trial and error, so they can maybe put an application in the cloud for a while, realize that it's not working, bring it back, which sounds a bit stressful if you've got to migrate there and then bring it back. But I mean, is there how shall we, I've put it like this, is there an optimized way of understanding what application goes where, or is it, as I say, more trial and error, or just experienced IT professionals have a sort of hunch, or best guess as to where it goes? How
Yeah.
scientific can you be, I suppose, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, I think there's a level of it that you can certainly be scientific about it. And what people are doing are really kind of looking at um, the nature of the workloads and the nature of the applications. And I think there's increased tooling and technologies that are, and as well as service providers that are helping with this, right? And I know the cloud providers are helping with their consulting teams as well, professional services teams, and understanding it. So I think some of the guidelines would be certainly anything that needs elasticity at its heart, right? And then all those things that cloud has promised in terms of elasticity, flexibility, massive scalability, as well as scale down, not to only scale up. So retail workloads, seasonality that happens there, contractor workloads, they're on for a project or a period of time, and then they roll off. M&A activities. We need a sudden burst of capacity, to deal with it for a certain period of time. But we also see is, some of those are maybe permanent kind of workloads. Maybe contractors kind of come in waves and roll over each other, but so there's always something up in the cloud, maybe not the same exact users. But in the M&A scenario, I think that's sort of a planned remigration, right? Is while it's uncertain and while there's a need for that elasticity, let me use the cloud for it. As I understand that workload better and I can plan for it, then I'll make a decision on, do I want to incorporate that into my data center where I can amortize it in a more traditional kind of way, right? If I understand that the workload is relatively consistent and it's going to cost me the same thing month over month, year after year, those are the things that I might want to keep under my control. As long as I also have that option to burst and expand into cloud when I have those unforeseen events. I think what's the hard part for someone who's doing a lot of stuff on-prem is that in order to plan for a DR instance, right, they'll get very nervous when they start to hit 60% utilization of their capacity or more. And it starts to get to that level, and it's like, okay, if there's a DR event, I can't recover. So you keep a lot of excess inventory of hardware in a data center to do that. Well, if you've got more hybrid solutions coming at you from vendors, then that are designed to say, hey, this stuff can stay on-prem for this use case, but if you have a DR use case, we can very quickly move it into cloud, right? That sort of thing enables them to take the best of both worlds.
Okay, that's some great insights into what's going on in the world of IT cloud on-prem stuff. And I say, I think everyone's understood that hybrid is the future, but it's interesting to see how that how that's going to evolve. But so it's been great to chat and understand what's going on from the report. So Calvin, thank you very much for your time. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Philip. It's been a pleasure talking to you.
Thanks again.